Hello everyone, Reza here. Welcome to my channel and to another Unreal Engine tutorial. This is the third and final part of our Chaos Destruction series. In this lesson, we will explore force fields and integrate them with our favorite Niagara system, combining it with the Chaos system. We will also create a custom shader for Niagara to enhance the visuals effects in our level. By the end of this tutorial, you should feel confident diving deeper into the incredible world of Chaos Destruction. I hope you enjoyed this series so far, so without any further ado, let's get started. Here I am inside the Unreal Editor. I'm pretty much repurposing the previous scene in Introduction to Chaos Destruction Part 1 and 2. So this would be the subject of our tutorial. We are going to break it. We're going to use force fields and we are going to use Niagara to add trailing particles and dust upon destruction. So I already have some destruction ready to go. So if I go into fracture, I have my geometry collection ready to go, and I have 4 levels using 3 uniform and 1 cluster. For damage threshold, I'm using 100,000 for my first unit, and as I go all the way to index 3, this damage threshold gradually lowers. Now, funny thing is, if I just go into selection and go into simulate and press simulate, nothing happens. The reason is in my previous sessions, I used to bring this guy up, and as I press simulate, things will fall apart. But I don't want to do that. I want to actually break things upon impact. So let's say someone's going to shooting at this statue, or it gets hit by an hard object. Then that would be the cause for this statue to break apart. And that's why we want to use force fields. By the way, if none of these make sense and you really have no idea what a geometry collection is, what damage threshold is, or how to fracture an object, I highly encourage you to go back and revisit Introduction to Chaos Part 1 and 2. Alright, let's start. Where to find force fields? We need some sort of a velocity field, an energy to break this apart without me moving this object up all the time. To find force fields, you need to make sure that your engine folder is up and shown. Go to settings, show engine content. Then in here, you type in FS. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These guys are force fields in Chaos Destruction. Anchor, base, bomb, master, radial, and sleep. Now I'm going to perhaps dedicate a separate video to go over all of them and explain all the key attributes, but at the moment what I want to pick is the one-stop shop field, which is called master field. With this field, you can apply physics-based effects like impulse or radial forces across various objects within the scene simultaneously, make it easier to control large-scale destruction. That's why perhaps 80% of the time, if I'm not exaggerating, I'm using this force field. I'm going to bring it to the mix. And the cool thing about this field is you can actually target an area and the destruction happens from that point. So I can just cover this area and say I want this to break from this point, which is, by the way, not the purpose of this tutorial. I actually want to break it from the base, but I can say break it from this point. And that's what's going to happen. But for now, I'm going to move it down somewhere around here, kind of at the center. I'm going to make it intentionally a bit off center. And let's scale it. Maybe 9.5 or 9. That should do it. Now, you may have noticed when I simulated this scene, I'm experiencing a delay. That delay comes from the default rollout, activation type set to delay, delay amount set to 1. If I increase that, then I need to wait longer for the destruction to happen. There you go. We perhaps don't want that. So what I can do is to zero out the delay on my master field. I noticed also that this field is so close to this pot, which also has geometry collection, that it breaks the pot as well. So I might bring this guy here ever so slightly and bring the field as well. So these chunks can break the pot, but not right at the beginning. Let's try again. Cool. I'm going to select the master field and set the delay to 0. So as soon as I simulate, everything breaks. Now let's explore some vital and important properties in our master field. The first one is velocity, radial magnitude. If I increase that to something really, really high, to 2000, we're going to see something funny, but let's see. Things will fall apart and break down. So the amount of velocity pushes all those pieces up high onto the ground. That is perhaps a bit too much. I can use something more reasonable, like 550. Let's play. That works just fine. And it does the damage for the pot as well, which looks a lot cooler. The reason that the neck stays is actually intentional, because during my fracture, what I did, I used interactive selection to select my pieces. So if I go into interactive and select bits, you can see I did most of my fraction at the bottom because I want to place the field at the bottom so the most amount of damage will actually applied to the bottom half of the statue. I'm going to go into selection and select my master field. The next one is use directional vector. And that, if I tick that, like so, you can see now the velocity has a direction. So even though my radial magnitude is set to 550, it is actually pushing it really high in that direction, and the directional magnitude is actually by default very high. So we kind of get a funky result, at least for this example. Again, pushes things up high. You can leave that on and reduce it to a more reasonable amount, like so. So we get that initial push as well. So let's go with 100. We can perhaps feel brave today and go with 250. And that will do the trick. The next property that is important is torque. And torque is the rotational velocity. So it allows the pieces to rotate as they're flying around. Obviously, if you set that to a very high amount, then you get a really, really funky result as usual. So you got to be gentle with it. The default is 8. I'm going to set that to 16. So doubling the amount, and let's view. And that also allows the pieces to sort of fly and scattered a little bit. I noticed that leaves a gap behind. So if you've got a superhero and sort of descending and landing on the ground and you want to see the cracks and pieces falling down, torque can help you with that type of effect. And I guess to finish things off, the only thing that we need to tweak is dampening. and that is here, linear dampening and angular dampening. Linear dampening reduces an object's linear velocity over time. So an example like this, where we have a destruction, if I go in here, this property will gradually slow down the debris as they travel through the air, making them come to stop naturally. So we perhaps want to either leave it or increase it ever so slightly. The one is angular dampening. So after same debris pieces are thrown and start spinning, angular dampening will make it gradually stop rotating, and of course that creates more natural and realistic motion. Right now we don't have any, so let's just add a little bit of radial dampening into the mix, something like 0.8. Let's see what we get. That's definitely better. I'm going to set that to 0.9 and we are going to leave it there. So that's pretty much the key components of any force fields, more or less, that you introduce into chaos system. Now the next step is I really would like to follow this by some particles, the dust, to follow the trail and follow these bones as they getting destructed. Obviously, we are going to start with a Niagara system. I'm going to create a folder, call this effects or particles or Niagaras. That's really not that important. I'm going to go in and create a Niagara system. You can start with an empty Niagara system. In this example, I'm just going to bring the fountain and I'm going to remove a few redundant modules that I don't need. Right click, rename, NS for Niagara system, dust. Now let's have a look at what we need and what we don't need here. We obviously don't need gravity at this point, and we don't need add velocity at this point. I also want to make sure that I'm using GPU for my properties. So I'm going to go into details, GPU, and calculate bounds mode into fix. Now, right now I have a spawn rate 90 because we don't have any velocity. We have them all overlapped in one location. But the issue with these particles is they are not linked to our destruction. We need to find a way to tell Niagara to look into our destruction and generate particles from there. Well, the first thing that we need to do is to get rid of particle spawn and spawn from chaos. You may say, Reza, it's not showing. Well, remember, chaos destruction is a plugin, and what we have enabled is all the Niagara templates, the game templates, but the developer mode and the plugins are disabled. I'm going to enable that, and that's the first one that comes up on my list. I'm going to select that, and now when something breaks apart due to chaos physics, this module will spawn particles from those breakpoints. And we have tons of attributes, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or be scared, because for the most part, we're really not going to pay attention to too many of these. Why? Because we're going to read them from new user parameter. So where it says new chaos destruction, I'm going to click on this arrow and I'm going to type in read from new parameters. And you can see immediately all those overwhelming attributes go away and you have spawn percentage fraction. The cool thing about this module is it lets Niagara read custom user parameters and you can use them within the particle system. It is great for controlling particle properties dynamically, such as altering particle size, color, or even emission rate based on gameplay or environment factors. Now, we have this spawn from chaos, but what's going to happen if those particles get to the particle spawn and the Niagara emitter may not know how to generate those that we get from the chaos physics? Well, that's the time to add another chaos module into the mix, and that is called apply chaos data. So I'm going to type in apply chaos data, bring that in, and we can pretty much use the same user parameter, copy and paste. So we're dealing with all the relevant attributes within this module. Also, in order to identify particles, however faint and weak, we need to give this a very distinctive color, which obviously we are going to change later. I'm always going to make this something really noticeable, like red or green, so we can just see that we have something in the scene. I'm going to save. I'm going to bring that Niagara system into my scene, into the mix. It doesn't matter where you place it. I can centralize it. And now we have this. We need to make sure that under user parameter, under data source, we pick trailing data. Now that's an attribute that also gets controlled through project settings. So if I go into project settings, edit project settings, and just type in trail, we need to make sure generate trailing data is ticked. Very important. Now we talked about all of this. Let's simulate and see if we're getting anything. We are not getting Niagara system. Seems like there's another step that we need to make in order to make this happen. Well, if that happens, there are two things that you need to check, and I know for a fact that I haven't done one of them. The first one is the max number of data to spawn. And that is going to sort of specify the max number of particles that you would like to emit per chunk. I'm going to set that to a very, very high value, like 2000. And of course, data process frequency, the number of times the data frequency gets calculated. You don't want to make it too high, but I'm going to make that 15. Don't bring it up to 50 or 100. Otherwise, there is a possibility that Unreal Engine crashes. This is a processing data, and unless you have a very solid graphics card, you don't want to bump it too high. Now, that's the first thing, but although I increased these amounts or these values, I'm still not getting anything. You may say, Reza, maybe your particle size is too small. That can be actually the case. So I'm going to go to Uniform Sprite Size and make it something really noticeable, like 200 and 300. And I don't need mass, so I'm going to set that to Unset Mass of 1. Let's save, go back, play, and we still don't see the smoke. I can't help but noticing this poor pot gets destroyed every single time. So what you need to do, and that is extremely important, is to make a change on your geometry collection properties. So if I go in here, I'm going to collapse all of these. I'm going to go into my geometry collection, and under chaos physics, because there are just simply too many rollouts and finding things might be difficult, although you can search, under chaos physics, you scroll down all the way until you get to events. Expand events, and we have notify breaks, notify trailing. And you need to make sure both are ticked. The notify breaks option when enabled, will trigger events whenever a fraction occurs in the geometry collection. Notify trailing triggers event based on trailing behavior within the geometry collection, which is actually great when you want to create particles effect that follow fragments, such as smoke trail that we're trying to do. Now, let's try again, and this time our ugly particle system shows up, but at least we know that we've made connections. All right, let's stop this chapter here. In the next chapter, we are going to spend a little bit of time fine-tuning our Niagara system. We're going to create a custom shader for this particle sprite, so things will become more acceptable and more realistic. Alright, we need to make some changes in here, and it all starts with this sprite renderer and the material that we're using for this property. Let's go ahead and create our material. I'm going to go back into texture, and I'm going to create a material here so things are easier to find. mm_dust. Let's apply that to our Niagara sprite so we don't forget about it. Dust. Put that one here. Obviously right now it's just clean, nothing can be seen, so we're going to save for now, but let's go ahead and work on it a little bit. I'm going to bring that up, and every time you want to apply material to any type of particle system, the first thing you need to think about is the blend mode. Do I need metallic? Do I need specular? Do I need roughness? Nope, we don't want any of them. So I'm going to go to opaque and set that to translucent, and I'm going to go and set that to unlit. All we need is emissive and opacity. So let's start. I would like to have control over my image, and I would like to create a fall off for my image. You may ask, Reza, what type of image can we use? As long as it looks like smoke, you can use anything that you want. For example, I found this type of smoke, relatively low resolution image on the internet. I made it grayscale, black and white, and then I blurred it a little bit so it's not too wispy. Obviously with the destruction you really don't want to get a wispy effect. If we feel that these pocket holes are gonna show, we can blur it even more. You may have noticed that this looks like a normal noise pattern, and yes, you can definitely use that as well. So let's bring the blurred version of our texture sample into the mix. And we need to think about UVs first and foremost every time we bring in a texture. So let's actually think about that and create that. Coordinates is the first node that I'm going to use. Holding down M, left click, multiply, and that goes into my UVs. For B, instead of creating a constant, I would like to have control over my parameters. There is a node that allows you to set values for your materials when you're using it in conjunction with particle system, and it allows for real-time adjustments to particles and to material parameters. That is called dynamic parameters, and we used that in the past with few of the tutorials that we've created, including the scoreboard material tutorial. So I would like to have two parameters. The first one would like to be tile, the red channel. So that goes in there. Now eventually that is going to be channeled into our opacity, because for the emissive, for our particles, we are going to simply use a simple particle color, and that goes into our emissive. You can see we are starting to get something. I've already explained what a particle color is, but if you're not a frequent visitor of this channel, it allows particles color data set in the particle system to be accessed within the material, which is extremely useful. 9 out of 10, I'll be using that instead of putting anything else into emissive color. Now, let's do a little bit of work and set our opacity up. Now, I am going to select a channel. Let's go, because it's a grayscale, it really doesn't matter, and intensify it using power. And then I'm going to multiply that. That goes into A, and the B needs to go into a material function that again we have talked many times, and that is radial gradient exponential. And that simply creates a radial gradient based on the distance from the center and creates a controllable fall off. I personally use it to create soft circle effects like glow, halos, or masks, or fade outwards type of effect, which is exactly what we're trying to do. So I'm going to go radial gradient exponent. I'm going to add another parameter, and that is called erode. That goes into the exponential of my power, like so, and I'm going to set a simple radius for my radial exponential material function. So holding down 1, click, maybe something like 4.5, the value that kind of always works. And now we have this system ready to go. I'm just gonna move it back ever so slightly. All I need to do, because right now I'm getting the round look around this texture, if I go and apply that to the opacity, I'm kind of getting this round look, which is good, but now I want to fade them. So these particles are not going to look like blobs or soap bubbles. To do that, I need to create another multiply or multiplication and put that one there instead. A goes to A, and B goes to an extremely useful material called depth fade. As the name suggests, every time you apply depth fade, it adjusts the material's opacity based on its distance to the nearest surface. I use it mainly in water material or translucent materials to create those type of effects because it creates smooth blending. But in this particular case, we are actually going to use that for a different purpose. I am going to also create another multiply and go from alpha to A, alpha particle color to A, and then B can go in here, and that can be connected to my opacity. Now you may say, what happened? Why don't we see anything? There are two silly reasons. The first one is I have post-processing enabled in the viewport, and the second one is once I change from sphere to something like cube, you should be able to see the fall off here. So if I set this one to something like 0.1, you can see how easily this actually fades. If you want to get a bigger range or cover the bigger range, obviously you need to increase the radius. So let's try 0.5, and some of these bits are actually showing 0.55. Yeah, definitely not too good. 0.48, and I think we can get away with 0.48 in this particular example. So fairly straightforward, fairly simple, and that is going to serve as the texture for our sprite renderer here. I'm going to make sure that it's saved. bring that here, and let's go to the next chapter and fix some of these attributes and tweak the result furthermore. Alright, let's start with emitter state. Again, I'm not going to explain every single property one by one. I have introduction to Niagara, which goes for 1 hour, and in that video I will go over everything. For now, I'm going to make sure that the lifecycle mode is set to self. I'm going to set the loop behavior to once, and I'm going to loop that for maybe 5 loop duration. Then initialize particle. That's where we need to get rid of this ugly green color. For the lifetime, perhaps increase the max lifetime so we see a little bit of particle. They're not going to vanish too quickly. For color mode, what I usually do, especially when it comes to debris, I'm going to move it or change it from direct set into random hue saturation value. The reason I do that is now I have access to this where I can change a few bits and pieces and get a slightly better result. But first things first, please Reza, get rid of this color. So I might actually get something like this. We can always change that. I'm not really too sure if that is the right color. I'm going to reduce the alpha to something like 0.2. We don't want the dust to be so visible. With hue shift, you got to be very careful. I usually turn this off, but if you want to leave that on, then pick a very, very small value. Otherwise, you see all sorts of different color shades within your particle. It just looks really funny. If you look for something magical, then by all means go -5 and 5. But for what we're trying to do, we don't get too much variation in the dust color. Saturation range, we don't really change that. But value range, I would like to get some of that, where some dust particles are slightly darker than the other ones, so perhaps 1.1 to 0.1. That might be a bit of an overkill. We'll see how we go. And alpha source range, I'm going to set that to 0.8 to something like 4 or 5, so we get variation in the alpha scale as well. With the sprite size, I'm not really sure if that's the right one, but we usually want to get big chunks, so the blending happens a lot quicker. Mesh attribute, ribbon attribute, we don't even use, we don't care. Now with that, let's go ahead and play the simulation and see right off the bat with the new material assigned to the sprite renderer what type of result we're getting. Obviously, there are tweaks need to be made. Oh, the dust is just too thick, too dense. And that's another reason that once we enter this territory, it's all creative decisions. It's all kind of look dev. And I don't want you to follow along with these values value by value, because I'm using a different geometry collection with perhaps a different scale. I'm going to view that one more time. The trailing I like, but the density of the dust is definitely too much. That might be something that you want, but obviously we need to make more tweaks. Now in the material, we created this dynamic parameter, but we're not really using it in here. So the first step I need to take is to actually bring this dynamic parameter. So dynamic material parameter, and you can see we have tile and erode. I can turn off the other two. Don't need it. And let's go something like or maybe 0.3 with this. I'm totally winging it at the moment, not sure exactly what type of result I can get with these. I don't need the rest of them, we just need these two. So erode is going to erode the texture, and tile is going to make the texture bigger or smaller based on what we specified here, because tile goes to UVs and erode goes to the power, the intensity of the UVs. So let's go ahead and review again with those changes. If I want to get more texture as opposed to complete blur, I need to increase this. If I set this to 0, it's like we're using the original sprite render material. Look, I can play, and it's just blob that I'm getting. So I kind of need to increase that to something higher, like 0.75. Let's see. Yeah, getting some of the textures back, which is cool. Perhaps just blur it ever so slightly. And with erode, I'm going to first view this. I tend not to make too many changes. And with erode, if I zero that out and play, you can see again, I'm getting a little bit of a blob with all those artifacts. So I'm going to crank it up to something like 1 and maybe 6.5 with this. And let's go back and review. That is a lot better. So I'm getting somewhat closer to what I want with the texture, but there are a few bits and pieces I need to change. What really bothers me is the intensity of the dust, and that can get controlled through scale, sprite, size. So let's go to scale, sprite, size, bring that one in. Now you may have noticed if I play this again, as soon as this breaks, we get a huge amount of particles emitting. I want to delay that. I'm gonna say that once we get to 0.8 in time, then reveal everything, right? By the way, it's a good idea to somehow soften these tangents. And now I'm going to say for the next one, which is set to 1, I'm gonna say go beyond 1. So show everything when you get to 1, show everything, but perhaps go a bit of overboard. Now, if you have trouble seeing this, I believe this is going to show everything in the curve editor. So I can sort of move that up, much easier to see. So if you ever want to have a look at what you're doing, you can always maximize this window using this right here. But for now, that should work beautifully. Now it's time, I think, to bring this. So 0.8 and reveal everything in 0.8 in time. And then when we reach 1, then increase that significantly. Let's see what kind of result we're getting, and we can always go back to this. I'm going to press F to bring my F curve. That's a small tip. That is cool. We're kind of getting somewhere. We're getting the result that we want, but the intensity is still a bit too high. That's where I have kind of two options to play around with the density of the particles. The first one is I can go into initialize particles, go in here and lower this alpha to something like 0.05. That's one way of doing this. So 0.2 was the original, 0.05. And you can see I'm getting a slightly opaque result. That's one way. I'm going to set it to 0.2. The other way is to play around with spawn from chaos, spawn percentage fraction. I can set that one to 0.2. I'm going to save and play. And you can see I'm getting a better result. So I think I'm going to go with the spawn percentage fraction because I'm actually targeting the number of spawn percentage, and that's, to me, it's a more logical way to go. Whereas with initial particles, you're actually playing around with the alpha, tricking the audience more or less. But see which one kind of works for you and take it from there. Now I'm happy with the result, but we have one more thing to do, and to add a little bit of wind, a little bit of force to this. So it's not like in a vacuumed, clean environment. We have force fields in any environment that we go to. So let's go to the next chapter and to our final chapter, make final tweaks. Let's make final changes, add our force field into the mix, and finish our tutorial. So let's finish the tutorial. I'm going to go into dynamic material properties. I feel like the simulation is a bit too crisp still. I want to blur out some of these obvious artifacts. So perhaps lowering this is going to soften the result. 0.45. Let's see what type of result we're getting. Simulate. Yeah, that's a lot better. And let's add a wind. So I'm going to go in here, type of wind force, bring that into the mix, and let's look at where the wind direction is going to go. So I want the wind direction to blow this way. So this means minus X with a little bit of Y. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, so minus 100 instead of 100, and perhaps 50 in Y, or 30. I don't want this to completely negate minus 100 as well. Wind speed, I'm going to set that to 20. Again, not really sure what we're doing. We're just experimenting. So let's play. Yep, the wind is taking place, which is good. I need a little bit of turbulence into the mix. So you can either add curl noise, but you kind of have curl noise here, so we might as well use it. Scale, let's bump it up to something like 3. With frequency, I'm going to increase the frequency. Lowering the frequency means lowering the wavelengths, and that can cause some erratic looks. So let's try it out, see how it looks. Not seeing much. Increasing that to 5, maybe lowering to 8, and have a look. Yeah, that's better. That's a bit chaos, like that. And really, that should do it. I can think of something else, but for now, this really should do the trick. There is a message here, which I'm going to dismiss. Let's have one final look. I can perhaps make this particle color slightly warmer, just a touch, because these are the debris that are coming from this color, so it really doesn't make sense if it's just too dusty looking. Yeah, that's better. Definitely better. All right, that should do the trick. Obviously, there's a lot that we still can do to amplify and to improve on our result, but these are basically a very, very basic, quick look at what you can do with this Niagara system inside Chaos Destruction, how to set it up, all the key attributes that you need to know about, how to activate them, how to bring force field, and take it from there. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you found this tutorial useful and use these techniques in your project. Thank you very much for your ongoing support as usual. Until the next video, see you guys later.